Hello, Chip GT here, and in this episode we're going to continue our build with Project Snow Day, and we are going to focus primarily on getting the VR room and VR cabinet set up and working. This video is going to be broken down into a few parts. Part 1 is going to be talking about the meshes, materials, and pictures that we need to import and how to get them configured and aligned and properly set up. Part 2 is going to cover all the coding considerations that you're going to need to consider when you're importing this into your own file. So without any further delay, let's coin in and push that start button. I want to say a big thank you to all of you out there who have subscribed to my channel. It truly has helped make the channel grow so that I can get better content for you. If you have not subscribed yet, hopefully today is the day that I earn your subscription so that we can create some better content in the future and get closer and closer to that 1,000 subscriber milestone. Most of you who watch my videos seem very interested in the VR content that I produce, and that's where I get most of the comments from you guys is I need help with a VR setting or help with a VR question. And the biggest question that I seem to get from you all is, how do I get a specific table to show the VR room and the VR environment? Because all I can see is a playfield. The thing you need to understand is that not all the people who develop these tables have taken the time to include VR into them, and most of the people who have are part of a team and they all work together to get all the cool features working. For example, one person may work audio files while others work the 3D models, the VR room coding, and so on. Most of the people in the community then will ask, like after a table has been out there and released, and you may be thinking, hey, I want to add VR to this table. Well, the first step that you need to do is ask the original authors for permission to modify their table. And you may want to explain what you want to add, and so that you get their permission, and you have to go about it the right way. Also, if you're creating a table, an original table from scratch, you must give credit where credit is due. So if you are pulling these files like I am from somebody else's work and putting it into yours, you have to call them out in your script under credits and say this couldn't have been possible without blah 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 blah, so on and so forth. If you don't do this, you're probably going to get shunned by the entire VR community of developers, and you'll get a bad reputation. Nobody will play your tables, and we don't want any of that. With that, this multi-part episode, so part 1 is releasing this morning, part 2 will be this afternoon, will help teach you how to add VR to a table that you may want to add it to. And this does 2 things. 1, it gives you the ability to add VR to a table that you love, and 2, it helps grow the existing community of VR enthusiasts to add your own unique VR tables that everyone can enjoy. I will say that depending on how deep down the rabbit hole you want to go, there are a ton of VR options to consider. And for the rest of this video, it's really going to be a choose your own adventure kind of video where you can go as easy as you want with a low poly table or a low poly cabinet and a low poly or like a very minimalist room with no coding whatsoever. And then you can go to the extreme end where you have the most extreme room with all kinds of extra coding, and you have a high poly cabinet with buttons, and when you push your flipper buttons, the buttons actually move. When you pull the plunger actually looks like it's being pulled out. So there's a lot of cool things that you can do with this. It's just how deep down the rabbit hole do you actually want to go? I have provided you guys with a link to my Mega Drive, and this Mega Drive file just continues to grow and continues to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just want to let you guys know I have 2 example tables for you today. The first one is the VP Workshop example table that has the VR built into it, and that is where we're going to get some of the bare bones basic cabinets and VR room and some of the coding and everything. It's all going to be from that particular table. And if you want something that's a little more advanced, then I've also provided you with the Iron Maiden table, but I did not include the pup pack. I'm only using the table so that I can export the things out of it that we want to add to our VR room. And then I have provided you a whole slew of different options and configurations for what you may need for what you want to do in your VR cabinet. So as an example, I have a low poly cabinet and I have a high poly cabinet. I have a full DMD back box and I have a normal DMD back box. And then we have a basic room setup, which is like 2 walls, a ceiling, and a floor. And we have the more complex setup, which has like a real working clock on the wall, a glass of beer with bubbles bubbling up through it, a whole bunch of other things in the room, VR boxes, shadows, and everything. I will say, if you want to go with the more extreme room, you're looking at days worth of importing, and it took me a long time to get all 80 some odd files up and running. And then when I ran it the first time, it didn't work right and I had to do a lot of troubleshooting. I'm going to help walk you through some troubleshooting steps that worked for me, and hopefully this will reduce the amount of time that you are spent hunting and pecking and trying to figure out why this doesn't look right or why this isn't working right for you. So if you want to go down that route, I've got everything for you. If you want to keep it simple, I've got that for you too. So let's go ahead and get started. So real quick, I'm going to show you guys what that looks like. Okay, so here we have the bigger, more extreme VR room. Notice that it has a working clock up there at the top, and it actually is the current time. And one of the issues I had with that is the pictures were imported at a -1 alpha, and it needs to be a +1, otherwise it's going to look terrible. Also in here, there's coding for the clock to work, and then also over here we have this beer glass off to the side with bubbles that are floating up. There's coding for each and every single one of those bubbles. So when I'm saying there's like 80 items to import, I'm talking like the shadows have to be imported, the boxes, the lights, the clock, the minute hand, the hour hand, the second hand, the face of the clock. There's 3 parts to this stand over here: the couch, the phone, the shadows for the phone, the VR headset, the desk or the dresser there, the lamp, and then the dresser over here with the plant on there. So, and then on top of that, you have your cabinet that needs to be imported: the legs, the bolts, the coin door, the start button, the plunger, the side buttons, the chrome railing, the lockdown bar, the back box. So this is the full DMD back box, and here in a second I'll show you the standard. But you'll see that I've still got a lot of the Iron Maiden stuff in here, and we're going to remove that in later videos. I'm not quite at a point where I'm ready to do the artwork. And you see how the cabinet has this glow on there. That is kind of a cool little feature that is you can customize. I'm not going to mess with it, but what I wanted to show you in this is that with this ultimate room, there's coding for the start button to be pushed and actually move in and out. And then for the flippers, you see the flippers there. So when I push the flipper button, the button moves. Same thing on this side for the flipper button. Right there. And then we have the plunger here. And there's special coding. Sorry, I keep looking up because I'm looking through the crack in the headset. There's special coding to actually have the flipper rod move out so that you get that visual as well. Now, with the bare bones basic cabinet, you're not going to have any of that coding. You're just going to have the regular coding. There we go. And here is the basic room with the high poly cabinet and the normal DMD back box. So this is all completely pulled out of the Vpin workshop files that they gave us. I'm using the high poly cabinet. You don't have to. So the high poly cabinet, the buttons will move, the plunger moves when I pull in and out on it. But this is like your basic room. There's not a whole lot to this. And you can notice that I don't have like the cabinets not all the way down on the floor, so I'm gonna have to move it down a little bit. But this gives you a basic VR room kind of a view, and everything works. I haven't really done anything for the DMD yet, but the DMD file is there, so that if you are running a DMD, it will display on here. If you are using a B2S file, it will run where the back glass is. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you're going to use the VR version of VPX or if you're going to use the regular version of VPX. You can do it in either way. I like having the VR headset on standby so that I can, after I import something, I can look at it real quickly. And what I like to do, and I'm just going to show you my full screen here, I like to have the example table off to the right, just enough so that while I'm working on the table here, I can see the settings and everything over here. And the first thing that we need to do is we need to look at our filters down here in the bottom corner. And what I want to show you is I have 6 different filters here. And the reason for that is we have 2 different types of DMDs, we have 2 different types of cabinets, and we have 2 different types of VR rooms, right? So in my table, I know that not everybody's going to have the same graphics card as me, so I am putting everything in there so that you can have a minimalist version, or you can have something that's a little more on the high end. That way, anybody can play my table, and then when you go into the script, you just pick, I want the minimal or I want the high, or, you know, if I want the full DMD versus the normal DMD. I don't know what I'm going to do yet with Project Snow Day, if I'm going to have a regular DMD or one that is a full screen. So I'm just putting everything in there that I can, and it's a lot. You may not want to do that for your version of it. Just keep in mind, if you're going to go with the minimalist room, you only have to do the minimal version of the room. If you want to do the full blown and have everything, then by all means do that. The process for doing this is going to be the same. But what I've done is I've broken down Project Snow Day into a VR minimal room, a VR cabinet basic, the VR backpacks normal DMD, then the VR BA STI, that's the VR room I showed you from Iron Maiden, and then we have the VR backbox with the full DMD from Iron Maiden, and then we have the VR cabinet, high polygon count, higher materials, a lot of extra coding and features for that. So you really need to choose what you want to do, and you're going to be assigning the items that you import to these specific layers. And then likewise, we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go back to the full screen here. We're going to do the same thing up here with the collections manager, and I'll zoom in on the collections manager here so that you can see that. There you go. And same thing again, VR pin cab high, VR backbox normal DMD, VR backbox full DMD, VR min, VR BA STI, and VR pin cab basic. We're going to use these collections in the code to say this is the one that I want active by assigning it a numerical value. I'm going to show you all of that in part 2. So for now, we're at a point, once you have these collections set up and once you have your filters set up, you're ready to start doing your imports. Just like in all the other previous videos, we're going to start with the materials manager, and you're just going to come in here and we're going to click add. Or sorry, we're going to click import. It'll open it up, and you're just going to navigate to wherever you downloaded my files that I've provided you. So I'll go to my desktop. VPX resources, episode 6, and I'm going to start by doing the minimalist room because there's only four items we have to import, but we have a whole bunch of different materials that we want to import, and you have to import the materials one at a time. So we'll just do no extra shading, open, there it is, it imported it. Notice that I've already got this imported, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this so it doesn't screw it up. And you're going to do that with all the different materials that I've provided you. Once you've got all the materials imported for everything that you want to do, the back box, the cabinet files, and the VR room, then you are ready to start doing your pictures. So then we'll go right over here, back to the table, image manager, and hit import. Now, with the image manager, you can import many different things at one time. So sticking with our basic minimalist room, we're going to go to images. And there's the image for the floor, the roof, and the 2 walls. So we'll just do that. Okay, I want to have a quick pay attention when you import your image manager. You see how this alpha mask went to -1? If you have anything like the hour hand here, that checkerboard is actually an alpha mesh that is translucent. If you leave that at -1, it will not be translucent. It'll actually look like a piece of paper with a minute hand on there, and it will not look right. So you need to make sure when you do your imports for your pictures, everything that you imported should be highlighted. You want to change your alpha mask to 1. If you're in doubt as to whether or not it's set correctly or if it's 1 or not, go to the host file or the host table here, and you can look at the image file that they have for the VR floor, and it is set to 1. See, floor, roof, walls, it's all set to 1. All right, so that is how I know I need to change this to a 1. I click OK, and now we're ready to import our meshes. And I've provided you with all the different meshes that you're going to need. I'm just going to really quickly import these meshes just to kind of show you. So over here, we're going to open up the VR folder that they've provided, and we're going to start with the floor. It's a good place to start. So I'm just going to double select it. You can turn it on if you want to see it, and sometimes it's good to see where exactly everything is. So you can see that this is going to be a fairly big room, so we might as well zoom out on ours as well. And I'm going to click the mesh tool, which is a little globe, and just drop a box. Then I'm going to click import mesh, and we're going to navigate to the mesh for the floor and click import. And you notice it doesn't look like how we want it to look, and that's because when it imports, it doesn't import everything the way that we want it to. So they have it turned on because they have the VR room always on for this. If you want to be able to turn it on and off in the settings, then you want it to start in the off position. So you would want to turn your visibility off or on depending on that. We're going to turn off those settings. I'm going to adjust the editor to 0.7 to match over here. And we're just kind of going to go through, and we're going to select the material, no shading VR, the image, and we'll just scroll down to VR floor. There we go. And then we'll do the 1 there, and everything else looks good. Now we're going to go to the position. The X position goes left and right. It'll move it left and right. Y goes back and forward. So if you're standing here, it comes closer to you versus going further away. And Z is the up and down position. And then we have the size. So we want to first adjust our position. So we'll say 12.3, 20, and 0. And then we're going to adjust our size, 959.3, 1000, and then 978. We're going to rotate on the x-axis 90 degrees, and then we're going to rotate on the y-axis 180. And there we go. That is the floor. We're going to name this primitive. We'll just call it VR_floor. I've already imported it, so I'm going to call it floor 2. And then you want to click on the wall. We'll click on it, right click on it, assign to layer, and then you can select VR minimal if you want. And then since we've got it imported, we might as well come up here to the collection manager. And with the minimalist room, I'm going to uncheck group elements together, and then we'll scroll down. We'll find VR floor 2, VR_floor 2, and then you just move the arrow over and it's in that collection. I'm going to take it out because I've already got the floor, the roof, and the wall in here. And then you're going to do the same thing for the 2 side walls and the roof. It's the same exact procedure. All right. I went ahead and I skipped ahead. I just got done importing the walls, the roof, and the floor. I put them together into the layers over here, and I added them to the collection at the top. Now I'm ready to start doing the cabinet files. Now, if you know that your back box is going to be for a normal DMD, then you can just include the normal DMD files into the filter that you're going to use for your regular cabinet files. If you are going to use the full DMD, same thing. All right, there's no reason why you want to separate it. I have them both in there because I plan on using this as a basic guideline for making other tables in the future. I've already started thinking about what my next table might want to be, thinking and learning about what I've been doing. And I'm like, well, I've learned from my mistake here. I'll maybe do this in the next one. So I have decided to make one file that has everything so that I can use that and manipulate it around for multiple different tables in the future. You don't have to do that. You can do whatever you want. You can have all of your backbox files in with your cabinet files and just make one cabinet folder, and that's fine. If you choose to do the low poly cabinet files, you're going to do exactly the same thing that we just did for the minimalist room. There's no extra things that you really need to know. It's just import mesh, add the materials, get it set up the exact same way. Now, for me, I'm using a wide body cabinet, so I had to adjust some of the leg settings a little bit. So if I click on the legs here, I actually had to adjust the X size to 1110 rather than what the example table had. So I'll just turn on all of their VR stuff. Click it. So you can see I had to make a few changes to accommodate the wide body legs, and it's the same thing with the cabinet rails. It's the same thing with the cabinet body. Everything had to go up just a little bit to make it fit, and that's why when you resize it and you move it around a little bit, it may not be perfectly lined up. You can actually click and grab this and drag it around and move it around and however you want to get it to be configured. Now, if you're going to go with the higher detailed cabinet, the high poly cabinet, you're going to be importing a lot of different things. You just saw that we had the legs that were all grouped together. In this version, the back legs are grouped together, the front legs are grouped together. You have more components that you're going to have to import. You have the buttons that you're going to have to import. You have the shooter that you're going to import, a housing for the shooter rod, the little rims around the buttons. You're going to have a whole bunch of different things, a whole bunch of different primitives like leg bolts and all kinds of other things. And, you know, just going through it real quick, I want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Yeah, there we go. So we got everything that we need for the legs. Okay. Now, when we go to do the back box, it's going to be the same thing. You're going to import everything like what we did, but there is a few new things in the back box. Here, I'll just drop this down a little bit. We actually have to create where the DMD is going to be displayed. All right. So if I click here on this DMD, okay, it's grouped it all together because of the collections. So give me just a second. Collection manager. I have to uncheck that box so I can individually grab each thing. Okay. So for this DMD, this is something kind of like a little tweak, if you will. We're not using a primitive. We're not using an imported mesh or anything like that. You're basically taking a flasher and you're assigning this flasher a position. It'll have a timer and it will have different things on top of it. And this is going to be called out in the code as to this is where the DMD needs to be. All right. So you're going to click on the flasher, which is the circle with the lightning bolt, and you're just going to drop it and it gives you a box. All right. The first thing I want to do is I want to change the color. We're going to make it white. So when you look at the DMD that I'm using here, this is the full screen DMD. In the example table over here off to the side, this is the normal DMD, but it's essentially the same thing. It's just the full screen DMD is going to be a little bit bigger than the other side over here. But what I wanted to show you is the position is not up here in a tab, it's down here. All right. So you need to have all of that right here. We're not going to assign an image to it. I'm keeping it invisible, and then you got to give it a name. All right. Now, how do you know where these corners go? Well, you just click on the corner and it gives you the position. You have to type in each corner individually to get it completely lined up the way that it needs to be. All right. So that is the only difference with a flasher and using a flasher as our DMD. Everything else that's in here is going to be a mesh. So just as an example, here's the back box itself, and it's a mesh with position information that you can get from the example tables. And then we also have the back glass, the full DMD. This is an image for the full DMD frame with the speaker panel. All right, so one last thing that I got to tell you before we're ready to go into some of the troubleshooting to help you get through this. If you're using the Ultimate Room, the BA STI room, there's going to be some timers that are going to be part of that room, and that controls the beer flow, it controls the clock, it controls a whole bunch of different things. There's several different timers. Do not group those timers into the collection folder, all right? Because those timers cannot be turned on and off from a visible perspective. I spent hours finding that I made a mistake by putting the timers into that collection. And, you know, I felt really dumb, but yeah, do not include those. As soon as I remove those out of the collection, from the collection manager, everything worked just fine. And that was my biggest issue. But just note that anything that you put into the collection, the reason why we're putting it into the collection is to turn it on and off through code. So if you have something in the collection that does not have a parameter of being visible, it's really not meant to be in a collection. I'll just put it to you like that. You can still group it down into the different layers, and that's fine. Just do not put it into the collection. Now I'm going to zoom out here real quick just to show you. It's going to take time to get everything imported the way that you want to. And when you go back and forth and when you start testing it and you launch the table in VR and you're like, oh, this didn't work out the way that I want it to. The first thing that you need to make sure that you have correct is the individual component. Make sure that you remembered to import the mesh. All right. Sometimes I would forget to import the mesh. So make sure you have the mesh. Make sure you have all these checkboxes correct. Make sure you have the materials correct. Make sure you have the image correct. If it doesn't have an image, don't give it one. Make sure your positional information is correct. And if all of that is correct, then it has to be something from the materials that we imported. So you can come over to the material, double check it. Make sure that all the settings in the material match the host table. If that's not it, then it's got to be a picture issue. And you want to come over to the image manager. You'll come down to your image and just double check that you have the alpha mask set correctly. All right. That was like 90% of my problems when I was doing the importing. The different meshes didn't have the right material assigned to it, or I realized that I already had a material of the same name and from a previous import that we did, so I had to create another one. So I had one as no extra shading VR, and then I had to create one no extra shading period. It doesn't look like there's that much of a difference between the two, but when you look at the base colors, it is different. One's a lighter color gray, and one's a dark gray. All right, so it's a dark metal, light metal. All right, so that was like 90% of my issues. If you're still having issues when you're troubleshooting and everything, go and look at your host file. I would go back and forth between the host file and I'd be in VR and be like, okay, this worked here. Why isn't it working for me? And I would just go through one by one, each individual component, making sure it worked. Now, if you end up going with the minimalist point of view and cabinet, and you do not want to have any of the extra things, like you just say, okay, I want the normal and all that, you don't have to have both. You can go easy on yourself. This is maybe a couple of hours worth of importing and getting set up. And if you want to see it right away without having to do any coding whatsoever, all you got to do is change the visibility to turned on. That's it. It's that simple. All right. Once you have that set up, you should be up and running and you should be playing. If you have a DMD hooked up and it's not working, there might be some changes that you have to make in the code. Look at the host file, check the host file's code to make sure that the DMD does not require any extra VR add-ons or anything like that. You can just very quickly search for VR and scroll through the code. But now we're at a point where we're ready to go into the second part of this video, which is going to be a separate video just over the coding. So if you enjoyed this video, please give me a like, please subscribe. I hope you learned something from this. I really hope that you guys become some VR enthusiasts and make it so that we have some extra tables out there that have more VR. And I'll see you in the next one.